Hi you guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing another true crime video. I'm really happy that a lot of you guys liked my last one. I know these videos aren't everyone's cup of tea, so I just wanted to let you guys know I have a week in my life that's coming in the next couple days. It should be up on Sunday, so if this isn't your kind of video, no worries. I have a week in my life that'll be going up very soon. But for those of you that do like true crime videos, I'm really happy because I do as well, and I'm really happy to be able to bring some cases to you guys and share some information that I find, shed light on some cases that you guys may not know about. So the case that we're going to be talking about today is the double initial murders, also known as the alphabet killer. This video is going to be a long one, so I recommend pausing and going and grabbing a snack. So this case took place back in the 1970s in Monroe County, more specifically the city of Rochester, New York. So this county's population back in the 1970s was 711,917 people. So very large. There's lots of different towns surrounding the city of Rochester, and throughout this case I will put up a map that shows the city of Rochester. It shows the whole Monroe County and the city of Rochester and all the surrounding towns. And I'm going to have a green circle around where it will indicate where a disappearance took place, and then the red circle will indicate where a body was found. So green circle, disappearance, red circle, where a body was found, just so you guys can kind of have a better picture. So getting into it, we're going to talk about Carmen Colon. So Carmen was a 10-year-old little girl. She was about 4 feet tall and was only 65 pounds. Her and her family were actually from Puerto Rico, so she didn't speak English very well as it was her second language. Carmen's mother was also only 14 when she had Carmen. And I don't have too many details on Carmen's home life, but I do know that she had been living with her grandfather. From what I could understand, her whole family lived in the same neighborhood or just relative area. And so she was always playing with all of her cousins and the neighborhood kids. But in the recent years, Carmen was living with her grandfather and his wife on Brown Street. And Brown Street actually, in the past, before the 1970s, it was a very popular shopping area. But by 1971, it had really deteriorated. It just had become not a nice area. It was filled with ex-cons and drug addicts. Just an area that was kind of going downhill. So on this particular day, it was Tuesday, November 16th, 1971. Carmen actually had a baby sister at this time, and her mother had sent Carmen out to go to Jack's drugstore, which was a drugstore very close nearby, and told her that she needed to go pick up a prescription that was for her baby sister because she had an earache or an ear infection. This errand wasn't out of the ordinary or anything unusual because Carmen actually would go to a little cigar shop and buy a candy bar often, and this cigar shop was even farther than the drugstore was, but they were both very close to where she lived, so neither of these places was a ways away or anything unmanageable. And the drugstore was actually so close that from her grandfather's house, you could see the drugstore. And her grandfather would go to the cigar shop to get candy and to the drugstore very often together. You know, he talked about how they would be walking together and they'd be walking home from the drugstore, let's say, and Carmen would be running ahead of him, and he'd kind of be behind her, keeping an eye on her still, but trailing behind as she's running ahead. And she kind of started feeling a sort of independence from this. And she was only 10 years old, and when you're that young, I think we can all agree or remember that feeling of little moments like that when you feel independent from your parents or your grandparents, that even though you're young, it's little moments like that where you feel mature and capable, when you kind of feel independent from your parents or your grandparents. But like I had mentioned, on this particular day, November 16th, her mother had sent Carmen off to the drugstore alone to go get the prescription for her baby sister. She actually didn't let her grandfather know that she was leaving, which is something that she normally would do. So she set off alone to the drugstore, and it said that she got there around 4:30 p.m. The clerk that was on duty at the time was actually the store owner as well, and his name was Jack Corbin. He reports that Carmen came into the drugstore and gave him the prescription that needed to be filled, as well as her mother's Medicaid card. card. If you're unaware what Medicaid is, basically it's a federal and state program in the United States where it helps aid medical costs for people who have limited income and resources. So Jack Corbin, the pharmacy clerk, told her that because it was a Medicaid purchase and he needed to also put in the prescription to be filled, it was going to take him a little bit. He had to fill out some paperwork for it, so he told her to come back in about a half hour. And that's the last time that Carmen was seen. We know that she did leave the drugstore. There's different reports of what happened when she left the drugstore. Some say that she just left the drugstore and, you know, went to kill time while she was waiting for the prescription to be filled. And then another says that before she left the drugstore, when the pharmacy clerk was telling her that it was going to take a little bit and that she needed to come back in about a half hour, that she told him, oh, I have to go, and kind of hurried out, and then was seen getting into a car right outside the pharmacy, like someone was waiting for her or telling her to be quick or something like that. So we're not really sure what happened when she left the drugstore, but we do know that that is when she did go missing. So when Carmen didn't return home a few hours later, her family started to worry and they started searching around the neighborhood. So like I had mentioned earlier, Carmen got to the drugstore at around 4:30 p.m. and a couple hours later, when she still hadn't returned home, her family started worrying and her family started searching for her around the neighborhood. And then at 7:50 p.m. they ended up calling the police because they had no luck looking for Carmen. So going back a little bit, about an hour after Carmen had been missing, this was before the police had even been called by Carmen's family. So Carmen was in the hands of her abductor or abductors at this time, and she had actually managed to free herself one way or another. She had jumped out of the car they were in, and they were actually on an expressway, and she was just running down the shoulder of this expressway in hysterics. She was naked from the waist down, holding her pants in one hand. And at this time it was rush hour, so traffic was heavy. There was lots of cars around, lots of people. So tons of people did see Carmen, and there's tons of reports of what people saw. So none of these people who were seeing this half-naked little girl running hysterically, screaming down the shoulder of the expressway stopped to check things out or try and help her. And psychologists have actually analyzed this whole situation, and they came out and said that we can't be too hard on the people who did drive by that day. And that's because, like I said, it was an expressway. The cars are moving relatively quickly, and by the time they processed and realized what they had just witnessed, they were already long past the scene, and they all expressed the guilt that they felt after this, realizing the next day when a little girl was reported missing that this was that little girl. And this also points to the fact that the bystander effect is very real, and people assume that, you know, someone else is going to call the police or someone else is going to go check things out, and that you don't have to because someone else is sure to go do that. And sometimes it ends up like this, where everyone may think that and no one goes to help. You know, this was a situation where it was so bizarre, the sight that people were seeing, that I'm sure it took them a second to actually process what they had just seen. But so there was a couple different reports of what people saw that day on the expressway, and there's actually a man named Nicholas Zook, and he was 27 at the time, and he actually recounted how haunting this experience was for him, and that the remainder of his life, he actually died, I think in 2009, or no, it was 2013, and it haunted him the rest of his life, and he constantly thought about Carmen and all the what ifs from that day. So Nicholas passed away in 2013, but his wife actually said that he had told her he had seen a Cadillac with 2 adults in it that was parked on the side of the expressway, and that the little girl had been running down the shoulder. He told her that as he passed by the car, he saw a woman get out of the passenger side and go to grab the little girl. His wife says that he did tell law enforcement about this, but it wasn't until 2009. 2 days after Carmen disappeared in the town of Churchville, there were 2 boys aged 13 and 15. They were in a deserted area and they were riding a motorcycle, just like joyriding. Mark was the 15-year-old and Jim was the 13-year-old. So Mark was driving. He still wasn't old enough to actually drive it, but he was, and he was the one driving and Jim was on the back. Like I said, they were in this deserted area and they kind of had a route that they were passing, like going in a big circle, and they had gone around it a couple times, and the third time that they were going around it, they were headed south towards Stearns Road, and Jim felt Mark's whole body tense up because he had been behind him holding onto him. He felt his body tense up, and Mark had been very talkative and just immediately stopped talking, and his body tensed up, like I said, and he stopped the motorcycle, turned it around, and drove it back in the area that they had just passed. And he said to Jim that he thought he saw something and that he hopes it was a doll. So when they got back to that area, they looked down into the ditch, and that's where they saw Carmen's lifeless body. She was exposed from the waist down without underwear or pants on. She was face up and her head had been rested on a rock. She was only wearing her purple sweater, blue socks, and her white sneakers. But when she had disappeared, she had been wearing a coat and pants as well. So the boys said that her head was placed on the rock and that it looked like someone had placed her there. They hadn't just rolled her down the ditch. She had been purposefully laid like that. They didn't know what to do. They were 13 and 15. First of all, they weren't supposed to be driving this motorcycle. Second of all, they're in an isolated area. No one is around. No one's even close. So the two of them got back on the motorcycle and they drove to Jim's house. So when they got to Jim's house, they told Jim's dad what they had just seen. He then called the sheriff's office, and him and the two boys got in the car and headed back to that area where then police met up with them. So Mark and Jim were placed in the back of a cop car and they were told to just wait there and they would be questioned about what happened. The two boys had nothing to hide, so they told the police officers the truth except for one thing, and that was just that they said they were riding bikes instead of the motorcycle because, like I said, neither one of the boys was old enough to be riding the motorcycle. Police officers believed that Carmen had been killed and then brought to that area that the boys found her in. Her coat was found 100 yards from where her body was, and her pants were found on the expressway in that area where she had been seen, but her underwear has never been found. Her whole body had been scratched up and she had bruises around her neck. She had been manually strangled with someone's hands. The autopsy also revealed that she had been raped and also suffered from a fracture in her skull, as well as her vertebrae before she had been strangled. Billboards were placed all around the county with Carmen's face, and then something strange happened, and it was in a department store. It was on the 6th floor of the department store in the men's bathroom. Someone had written something on one of the stall doors, and it said, "I killed a 10-year-old girl. Stop me before I kill again." So this obviously was very, very alarming, and it scared a lot of people, and they feared that this was just the beginning of something. And unfortunately, that was true. About a year and a half after Carmen's death, Wanda Wachowski went missing. Wanda was 4'7" and she weighed about 77 pounds. She had a chipped tooth that she had gotten from when she had fallen playing with friends on the sidewalk. I believe she had two younger sisters, one that was just a couple years younger than her and then one that was still just a baby. And she lived with her two sisters and her mother in a house on Avenue D. Wanda's mom, Joyce, was actually really ridiculed after Wanda's disappearance because she was known to go to the neighborhood bars, and also that her and her boyfriend were very heavy drinkers. Joyce had gotten married in her young 20s, and unfortunately her husband died, leaving her a widow. It's said that she had a parade of men coming in and out of her house. A man who went by Junior, her boyfriend, was her most recent. So due to the way that Wanda's mother was, it's said that she had a lot more responsibilities than a girl her age would normally have. She also didn't really go to school consistently. Her mother really wasn't looking out for her as much. She was out late and a lot of the times just kind of on her own. On April 2nd, 1973, Wanda was upstairs in her room coloring in her coloring book, and her mother called up to her and told her that she needed to run to the deli, the grocery store, for her to pick up some things because they needed diapers for her baby sister as well as some things for dinner that night. When Wanda set off to the deli, she had been wearing a blue and white dress, white socks and sneakers, and a blue and green checkered coat. Her mother had sent her off with a list of everything that she needed to get, and she headed off to the grocery store, which was only 3 blocks away. On her way there, she actually crossed paths with two of her neighborhood friends just on the street, and also several people in the deli, including workers, said they did see Wanda and that she went there. She picked up all the things, and the clerk actually placed all of the groceries and things in one big bag for her because he knew that she was going to be the only one helping carry these things home. So he put everything in a big bag for her, which still was difficult for her because, you know, she's this little girl and she had this big bag of groceries to walk home. So she bought the groceries and started walking home with this big bag in her arms, and people reported saying that she was carrying this bag that was practically the size of her. And 3 children that actually knew Wanda said they saw her from across the street. They were just playing, and that Wanda had stopped and pushed herself kind of up against a fence to get a better grip on that big grocery bag. And they said they kind of looked away and then they looked back and she was gone. So when Wanda didn't come home, her mother actually decided to send out Wanda's younger sister to go find her. So Wanda's little sister and one of her neighborhood friends went to go to the deli to try and find Wanda, or maybe find her along the way. But when they got to the deli, the workers actually told her that Wanda had already been there and that she had already bought all the groceries and was headed home. So the girls then went home and told her mother that Wanda wasn't anywhere to be found, and at 7:47 is when Wanda's mother called the police. So a search and rescue team was immediately sent out and they began looking for Wanda all over the neighborhood, and unfortunately they found nothing came from it. But while this search was happening, some information was actually brought up to the police, and that past Saturday, Wanda and her friend Linda at 10 p.m., which is very weird to me for a little girl to be out at 10 p.m. alone with her friend, and as they were walking in the dark, they were being followed by this stranger, and they said it was dark, they weren't able to see this man's face. He was also hiding behind bushes, so they weren't able to get a good look at him, but they did notice that he had a buckle on his shoe. And this took place on train tracks that actually are no longer there today. I'm pretty sure it's just like an alleyway between 2 buildings. But Linda's mother actually ended up calling the police about this, and the police looked into it and nothing came from it. I read that, but then I also read that the police found out that it was this local sex offender, but if that was the case, that he wasn't related to the crime. So the morning after Wanda went missing, a stormtrooper was patrolling outside of the city of Webster, and he saw something white sticking out of a hillside. He was really suspicious, so he pulled over just to check it out, see if it was anything, and that's when he discovered that the white that he had seen was a little girl's dress, and it was a little girl, and it was the body of Wanda. So Wanda was in that blue and white dress that she had on when she went missing, but an autopsy did reveal that she had been raped and sexually assaulted. So similar to Carmen Cologne, but Carmen was found half naked, whereas Wanda had her dress on. So she had been either allowed to redress herself after, or her killer redressed her after. The autopsy also revealed that she had been strangled from behind with a belt. She did have bruising all over her body, but she did not have any scratches like Carmen's body did. Something interesting is that Wanda had custard in her stomach, and Wanda didn't have any money. She had money for groceries, but that was it. There was no money for ice cream, and let alone there wasn't anywhere even remotely close that she could have got custard from. And the autopsy revealed that she had eaten this 2 hours before her death. So it's believed that the killer gave this to her. Maybe it was like a bribe. That's how he lured her in, promising custard. So there was actually a hotline that was set up to call in tips on Wanda's abduction and murder. And an anonymous tip actually came in that they had seen a white man and a red-headed little girl, and he had forced her into a light-colored Dodge Dart. But they didn't hear from this person again, so they weren't able to get any more information. But there was also another anonymous tip that came in saying that they had seen a similar car or the same car in the area where Wanda's body was found. So about 7 months later brings us to Michelle Mienza. She was 10 years old. She had hazel eyes and shoulder-length brown hair. She was described as a really happy, nice, sweet little girl, but sadly she was bullied at school because she was more on the shy side. She was introverted, and she was also a little bit chubby. Michelle had 2 younger sisters, one that was just a baby and then one that was a few years younger than her. So the 2 of them went to the same school. She also had 2 older brothers, but they lived with their dad, so just the girls lived with their mom. Michelle's mother's name is Carolyn, and Carolyn was very protective over her daughters. She really tried to do everything right. You know, she would bring them everywhere, and she'd also walk them to school, and she'd also also walk to school to walk them back from school. And sadly, this was another reason why Michelle was bullied by kids. So on November 26th, 1973, Michelle had a really rough day. She had been relentlessly teased and bullied, and I read somewhere that she spent a lot of the day in the nurse's office crying. So on this day, Carolyn walked to the school to pick up her daughters, and Marie, that's Michelle's younger sister, the one that's only a few years younger, was the only one that was there to be picked up. The school had told her that Michelle was just staying after that day, and they didn't tell her this until after, but Michelle was held after school in like a detention, also with her bully, because the two of them had gotten into an incident on the playground, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, they were both punished for this and held after. So Carolyn decided to bring her daughters home, just Marie and the baby, and she told the school to just let Michelle know that once she was done with whatever it was that she was doing, because she didn't know that she was there for that reason, that she could just walk home after. It was a relatively short walk, and Michelle had done it before, so it wasn't a big deal. So after that rough, probably very sad day that Michelle had, it was about 3:15, and it said that she left the school and began walking home. But like I said, she was a very nice, sweet little girl, and she decided that instead of going straight home, she was going to go to a Super Saver store in the Goodman Plaza where her mother had left her purse that previous weekend. So this is when Michelle went missing. She was last seen at the intersection of Webster Avenue and Ackerman Street. She was wearing a purple hooded coat with silver trim, purple pants that had a zigzag pattern, and black knee-high boots. There was also a little girl named Cynthia at this intersection at the same time Michelle was, and she actually knew Michelle because they used to go to school together. So because of this, she was able to recognize her very easily, and so she knew that it was Michelle. So this little girl, Cynthia, had been headed to visit a friend, and so she went and did that, and then after, she came back to that same intersection, and she again saw Michelle there, but this time she saw Michelle getting into a beige sedan, and it was speeding relentlessly towards Webster Road, and it actually pulled out in front of another car as it turned onto it, and this car had to slam on the brakes, and they also almost hit Cynthia when they did this reckless turn. Police actually didn't really take Cynthia very seriously because she was just a little girl. They thought, I don't know what they thought, but they just didn't take her seriously. They didn't really believe what she was saying. That was until the driver that had to slam on their brakes because of this beige sedan that pulled out in front of them came forward and told the exact same story. Then they took Cynthia seriously. Cynthia was actually interviewed again in 2016, and she says that she felt like she had recognized the man that was driving the car, that maybe she had seen him around the neighborhood at a little pizza shop or something like that. By 5 o'clock, when Michelle hadn't returned home, her mother had gotten very worried and immediately called the police because she knew something was very wrong. Michelle wouldn't run away, she wouldn't get in a car with a stranger, and that she was missing, and she needed the police's help. So a search began in the neighborhood to look for Michelle, and this actually put such a strain on Michelle's mother that this whole thing happened, and Michelle's mother ended up in the hospital because this just broke her and she just had a mental breakdown. A witness came forward later saying that they saw Michelle and a man at a hamburger joint in the town called Penfield, but that Michelle had stayed in the car while this man went to get the food. There was also a witness that came forward and said they saw a car parked on the side of the road, and he thought maybe they needed some help, maybe they had a flat tire, and so he also pulled over to see if he could help them. When this man pulled over and stopped to see if they needed help, the man seemed very agitated, and he just did not want his help at all. He wanted him to just basically leave him alone, and he said everything's fine. He was also trying to block a little girl that matched Michelle's description that was also in the car, and he was trying to block his license plate. Just very weird. So 2 days after she went missing, on November 28th at 10:30 a.m., her body was found in a town called Macedon. And her body was found in an area that was actually less than a mile from where that car had been seen and pulled over, and that man had stopped to see if it needed help. She had been bruised, raped, and strangled from behind with an object just like Wanda had. And also like Wanda, she was fully clothed, and the only thing missing was her coat. The police found white cat hair on her body, which I didn't mention, but was also found on Wanda's body. So I know that Wanda and Michelle's body had that white cat hair on them, but I've heard mixed reports of Carmen's body also having the white cat hair on it, and then people saying that no, it didn't have the white cat hair on it, and only Michelle and Wanda's did. So take that with a grain of salt. I'm not really sure. Just like when you're comparing the three, take that with a grain of salt. The autopsy of Michelle's body also revealed that she had eaten a hamburger in the hours leading up to her murder. So that connects with the witness statement that she had seen Michelle and a man at that hamburger joint in Penfield. So I'm not sure if you've picked up on it, but the reason these three murders are considered that of the alphabet killer is because each of the little girls had the same first and last initial. Carmen Colon, CC, Michelle Mayenza, MM, and Wanda Walkowitz, WW. And each girl's body was found in a town that also started with that letter. Wanda was found in Webster, Carmen was found in Churchville, and Michelle was found in Macedon. So that's why people started calling these the double initial murders, the alphabet killer, believing that the three of them were linked. So some more information, there was actually a little girl who was 6 years old at the time, and her body, this is 1976, she was found outside of her apartment building and she had been raped and strangled to death. Her mother was 22, she was described as very unstable, a drug addict, and at the time that she went missing, it was around 2 a.m. and her mother had left to go to a bar to buy cigarettes or something, and when she came back she saw that she was missing, and that's when she found her body outside of the apartment building. And it actually didn't come out until 2001. I read 2001 and then I also read 2007, so I am not sure, but I read that one of the suspects actually became linked and was charged with this crime because of a DNA match from this crime scene, and it was actually from a cigarette butt. And so this is a very long time after this took place, but 2001 or 2007, and James Pressler, who was actually the superintendent of that apartment building, was linked to this murder because of the cigarette butt and the DNA match. He had actually been at the scene of the crime when the police were called and showed up, so I'm sure he was acting disgustingly surprised and shocked and just gross and really sad, but I'm glad that he was finally caught. But unfortunately he'll never see justice because he died in jail before he was tried from a heart attack. Okay, so now let's move on to some theories about this case. The only reason I wanted to bring that case up is because it's similar little girl and similar attack, definitely different ways and the way the body was found, but I just wanted to bring up that information for you guys to just kind of take what you want from it. Now moving on to the theories of this case. So this first theory is that Wanda and Michelle's murder was actually done by someone different than whoever murdered Carmen. And this is believed because a lot of people think that Carmen's uncle is the one who is responsible for her assault and death. I've mentioned this a little bit, but there's definitely differences between Carmen's murder and then that of Wanda and Michelle's. Wanda and Michelle's had a lot more similarities. Carmen's body was found a lot more beaten. She was found exposed. She was half naked. The two other little girls weren't as beaten. They weren't exposed. They had their clothes on. There was a level of humility in Carmen's case because she had been placed out in the open, half naked, her head resting on a rock. She was just exposed. She had been badly beaten. Her skull was bashed in. And people actually believed that Carmen's uncle could be responsible for this. His name is Miguel Colon, and he is Carmen's biological dad's brother. And he was actually in a relationship with Carmen's mother. So Miguel was Carmen's mother's boyfriend at the time. People believed that he could have had something to do with it. He became a suspect because shortly after Carmen's death, he had told a friend that he did something very bad and then he fled to Puerto Rico. Some information, just Carmen's hair and her doll were found in Miguel's car, which I feel like that's not extremely weird or out of the ordinary. So at the end of March in 1972, so this is 4 months after Carmen's disappearance and murder, US police actually went to Puerto Rico and tracked Miguel down and brought him back to the United States for questioning. So he denied having anything to do with what happened to Carmen, and his family says that the reason he fled to Puerto Rico is because he thought that he was going to be in trouble with the police, him and Carmen's mother, because Carmen's mother was on welfare. But he was living with Carmen's mother and he was not on the case of Carmen's mother with the government. So the government didn't know that he was also living there. Basically, the government kind of reviews your case to see who lives with you, like what the jobs are, everything like that, and just lots of different pieces that go into it, basically just to see if you qualify, how much you qualify for, that kind of thing. And so he believed that he and Carmen's mother would get in trouble for fraud, and they would be in trouble with the law for that. That's at least what they said. Some crazy information, just some extra information. I personally don't think Miguel is responsible, but in 1991, Miguel actually tried to kill Carmen's mother. So the police were called, and once they got there, Miguel actually ended up killing himself. Maria, who was actually Carmen's half-sister, so Carmen's mother and Miguel had Maria, and this is Carmen's half-sister, and she actually came forward and did an interview in 2018 kind of reiterating that her father had nothing to do with this. Maria and Carmen's mother actually came forward saying this in the interview. I'm not really sure what to think about this. The more I think about it, the more I just go back and forth of, oh, maybe he did do it, maybe he didn't. So I'd be really interested to hear what you guys think about this, or if you have any more information to let me know about that down below, just regarding her uncle's involvement in this. Another theory is that a man named James Barber is responsible. So he was actually a cook in the area that Carmen lived in, and where he worked there was a punch-in clock system. And on the day that Carmen went missing, he actually manually wrote in the time, clocking in or out, instead of physically punching in with the clock. And then the day that Carmen was discovered, he left. He didn't take any of his belongings or let his job know, he just left. Police found out that James was actually wanted in Ohio for sodomizing a 15-year-old girl. I'm not sure the timeline of all of this, but by the time police were able to track him down and find him, he had died. I'm assuming of natural causes. I'm not sure, maybe, I think it was just old age. I don't know how long this happened after, but by the time they were able to find him and track him down, it was just him in a graveyard. Okay, so the next theory is about Dennis Termini. He is someone that is believed to have been responsible for these killings. He's also known as the garage rapist. So Dennis was a firefighter, and he had actually previously tried to kidnap a 16-year-old girl from behind, but I think she screamed, and she somehow was able to get away because she was screaming and putting up a fight, causing a scene, basically exactly how she should, and Dennis got scared and he ran off. But unfortunately, shortly after, he was able to get a hold of an 18-year-old girl. And this is because he snuck up behind her and held a gun to her head and brought her into an empty garage. She was told to get undressed by him, but thankfully a neighbor had seen this all go down and called the police. So the police showed up and Dennis fled. He had found an unlocked parked car on the street, and he ended up hiding in there, locking the car from the inside. But it had actually just snowed, and it was a fresh layer on the ground, and so it was very obvious from Dennis's footprints where he ran off to. So police were obviously able to find him in this car, and when they found him in this car, he just put the gun to his head and killed himself. Lots of people believed that he could be responsible for the 3 girls' murders because he could have been in his firefighter uniform, because people say that he always had it in his car. It was always with him, whether it was on him or not, it was just always in his car. And so this could have been something that made him seem trustworthy to the girls. After his death, it came out that he was responsible for at least 14 rapes, and that's how he became known as the garage rapist. And these rapes took place between 1971 and 1973, so that's the same time span of the 3 girls' disappearance. And another thing that's interesting is Wanda and Michelle's bodies, like I had mentioned, maybe Carmen's, maybe not. There's conflicting reports of this, but that white cat hair, that was definitely found on Wanda and Michelle's body. In Dennis's car, as well as on his clothes, he also had white cat hair on him. One thing though is that these 3 little girls didn't match Dennis's victim. He usually always went for 16 to 18-year-old girls, and he didn't kill them. He would rape them, but he didn't kill them. Criminals are very sick, and I watched another video of this, and she was talking about how criminals like what they like, and they go for the same victim. They have the same MO, and they don't just kind of switch up their victim, especially when it's a serial killer or a serial rapist. And so it was unlikely that it was him. There was also DNA from each of the 3 girls, but the only one that was left when it could be used to test in our day and age with our technology was the DNA found in Wanda's underwear, because I'm assuming the DNA from Michelle's body as well as Carmen's body, they must have used over the years or got lost. I don't know, but somehow they don't have any more DNA from them. They only have DNA from Wanda's underwear. And in 2007, they actually exhumed Dennis's body from his grave and tested the DNA that was found in Wanda's underwear to him, and it wasn't a match. Another theory is about Kenneth Bianchi. He is a Rochester native, and he actually moved out to LA, and him and his cousin raped, tortured, and murdered at least 10 women in LA. The women were all strangled and left on the hillside, and that's where these two men got the nickname the Hillside Stranglers. And they would lure women in by dressing up and staging as police officers. Kenneth had actually lived in Rochester during the time of the little girls' murders. He left Rochester in 1995, and when he lived in Rochester, he was actually a cab driver and an ice cream man, so he definitely had access to children. It was in 1981 when it was brought to the public's attention that he could be responsible for the girls' murders because of the similar way in which they were strangled and dumped in open areas. Kenneth was actually really angry about this, and he really tried to clear his name from these girls' murders. As sick and disgusting criminals are, they do have certain moral standards, some of them, and I think we all know that the way that child killers, rapists are treated in jail is they really do get what they deserve in jail. You know, they get beaten up a lot or killed, and you know, even criminals don't like these people. So, and Kenneth was also already facing 2 life sentences for the murders that he had done in LA, so he didn't really have anything to lose at all if he was to admit to these 3 girls' murders. And he also willingly gave DNA and fingerprint samples to try and clear his name from this. The DNA that was found from Wanda's murder, like I said, is the only one that they were able to test, and it was not a match. Another theory that many people believe, I feel like this is one that most people believe, is that Joe Nassa was responsible for these. In 2010, he was arrested for committing the murders of at least 4 women in California, but it's suspected that he killed a lot more than that. And he's actually a Rochester native, and the reason that people started thinking that he was connected and could have been responsible for these murders of the 3 little girls is because everyone that he murdered, all those women in California that we know of, all had twin initials as well. And also one of his victims was named Carmen Colon, which is the same as one of the little girls that was murdered. The women were also all raped and strangled, similar to the little girls, but his DNA cleared his name for at least Wanda's murder, like I've talked about. It didn't match the DNA that was found in her underwear. The little girls also didn't match his victim type because he was going for women in California. He wasn't going for little girls. He was victimizing women. This guy was just a weirdo. He actually insisted on defending himself in court, and he also had a very creepy, weird scrapbook that had pictures of all the women he killed and drawings and a description of what went down and how they suffered. So he ended up being convicted and in prison on California's death row. Another theory is that Theodore F. Given Jr. was responsible. So 10 months after Michelle Mayenza's murder, which was the 3rd little girl that I talked about, he kidnapped 2 little girls in a park. He lured them in by saying that he had baby bunnies in his trunk, and that's when he kidnapped the both of them, brought them back to his house, and he assaulted one of them. But then he brought them back to that same park and let them go. So because of this, he went to prison for 10 years. He had actually been in trouble with the law a lot. He had been in and out of prison, and he was actually in prison at the time of Carmen Colon's murder, but not that of Wanda and Michelle's. And at the time Michelle Mayenza went missing, he was actually only 200 yards away because he had been sleeping at his dad's house on his couch. And also during the time that he served in prison, that 10 years for kidnapping the 2 little girls from the park, the murders stopped. And then 10 months after he was released, another little girl was murdered. It was 14-year-old Wendy Lynn Jerome. Her body had been found beaten and raped, and it was actually put at the entrance of the school that Michelle Mayenza went to and was coming home from that day that she went missing. And then in 1986, he raped another little girl during a home break-in, and ever since then he's been locked up. That was until 2010 when he was moved to an institution for the criminally insane. And something very eerie scary and creepy is that the composite photos that witnesses drew from the various three little girls' disappearances and murders is very, very similar to that of Ted Gibbons. So if Wanda, Michelle, and Carmen's murders are connected, it's thought that their attacker must have known them, because how would he have known their first and last initial? How would he have known the exact time that they would be vulnerable and alone and able to be attacked without being seen, without a trace? Basically, these girls just disappeared with no strong leads of where they went. But then again, it was also very common in the 60s and 70s to have the same first and last initial, because the people that were popular in like the movie industry and magazines was Marilyn Monroe and Bridget Bardot. Those are the very popular women icons at the time, and so it was very trendy, and that's just a lot of people named their children with the same letter of their last name. The only point I'm trying to make from that is that it was relatively common to name your daughter or son with the same initial of their last name. It's likely that this is a coincidence, or at least when I've heard people talk about the fact that this could be a coincidence, it does make sense, because, you know, this killer would have to be some sort of mastermind and insanely smart to prey on these girls and know the exact moment that they would be alone and vulnerable and be able to be taken without being seen. And it's likely that it could just be a coincidence. And I'm not trying to disrespect by saying that. I'm just trying to say that maybe this killer isn't the mastermind that people think. He may not have been as manipulative and smart as people believe he is. I honestly have no clue what to think with this case, you guys. Part of me thinks it's a coincidence, part of me really does not. I believe so many different things in this case, and I really just have no idea. So I would love to hear what you guys think. If I missed any details or information, theories, let me know down below. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys would like more true crime videos in the future, make sure you guys like this video and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!